And great. And my name is Jordy Izzard, and I am a SAIS Alumni Relations Officer at the Washington, D.C. campus. And I'm here today with Warren Clark, who graduated from the SAIS Washington, D.C. campus in 1964. And it is a delight to have you, and thanks for giving us a little bit of your time.
Thank you for coming by.
Today's date is April 26th, 2012, and we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation. And why don't we go ahead and start with what originally brought you to SAIS?
Okay. I graduated from Williams College in '58. I then went in the Navy, and I ended up I was in Naval Air Intelligence, and I ended up working on the Middle East. We had just landed the Marines in Lebanon in 1958, and as an air intelligence officer, they had me writing country studies on the Middle East, and briefing admirals and staffs in the Sixth Fleet about the political situation in the Middle East. So I thought that was wonderful and very exciting. And I was 22 years old, and I knew everything. And after doing that for 2 years, I realized, maybe I don't know everything. I mean, I had read The Economist, and they hadn't, so that gave me an advantage. But I thought it might be nice to be a little bit deeper as to what was going on. So, while I was in the Navy, I passed the examinations for the Foreign Service. There's a written exam and an oral exam. I passed those. But I did not go directly into the Foreign Service. I said, can you wait? And they said, okay. And so I went to SAIS. Why SAIS and not something else? Well, it was in Washington, that was convenient. I also had a good friend who had been to SAIS and had a very positive experience. So that's why I ended up going to SAIS. And it worked out for me very well.
Well, and we were glad to have you as well. And tell us a little bit, when you were a student at SAIS, 62 to 64, what were your experiences and memories of being there? Yeah.
Well, the geography changed. It was quite interesting. I was there for the last year of the house on Florida Avenue, which is an old private residence, had been turned into a school. It was very comfortable. The relationships with the professors were very close and informal. We had big lecture halls where we went to nearby, but it was a very good, scholarly kind of environment. There was a small library, but it was quite adequate, I thought, for my needs. And as I say, because it was small, you got to know people. And you got to interact with people. I was curious about Castro in Cuba. Well, because we just had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And, well, there was a guy named Dreyer who had been an important guy in U.S.-Cuban relations. And he was there for a semester, kind of as a scholar residence. And so I would drop in and say, what happened and why did it happen? And we just would have very good conversations with real authorities on different issues. And I remember Dean Acheson came by one time. I was very impressed to see the former Secretary of State. And so that part of it was exciting. But also, it gave me a good grounding on international, from an academic point of view, on international relations. I was particularly interested in the Middle East, but I was also interested in economics and finance. And that's the way my career in the Foreign Service went also. I ended up doing both Middle East stuff and economics and finance, as well as Africa. So it gave me a very good background, a slightly deeper background in these areas, especially economics, which is not intuitively obvious sometimes and requires some technical knowledge. There was an absolutely wonderful teacher of economic problems in developing countries, a guy named Isaiah Frank. And he was terrific. He taught it on Saturday morning because he had a day job during the week. But he was absolutely first rate and gave me a very good, rigorous grounding on the economic issues connected with economic development. So all of that was very positive from my perspective. The second year was the first year. It was the first year. My second year was the first year in the Massachusetts Avenue building, and that worked out fine. It's bigger and more formal, but I thought it worked fine. By that time, though, my second year, I had already started work in the State Department. So I was just there sort of nights and weekends and things like that. But SAIS was good enough and flexible enough so that I could complete my requirements during the second year and complete what I needed for the degree, except for French.
No worries. That's great, though. You've obviously done a lot in the world, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about after you graduated from SAIS. Tell us about your illustrious career. And
well, I'm not sure how illustrious it was, but as I said, I was already in the Foreign Service by the time I graduated, or at least completed my degree. I didn't actually graduate until '69 because of the French requirement. I went from Washington in the spring of '64 to Beirut to study Arabic. I'd been studying Arabic here in Washington, not with Wilson Bashai, but the Foreign Service had been teaching me Arabic. We were there for several months and then spent 2 years in Syria, in northern Syria, a city called Aleppo, where we had a consulate general at that time. And I thought that was really exciting. First of all, it was adventurous, and that's one reason I joined the Foreign Service. But, having read about something about Syria under the French mandate, and having read something about the 20th century history of Syria, Lebanon, and the Middle East, I thought that SAIS opened my eyes to a lot of what was going on. That I wouldn't have seen, I would have been there, but I wouldn't have seen what was going on. I remember, and this harks back to my course with Isaiah Frank. I remember in Aleppo, which is, it's really very isolated. And so anytime an American or a European comes, you sort of welcome them. Oh, how are you? And you want to get the gossip and what's going on. So there was this fellow who came around, and he was an American scholar. And I said, oh, come, let's have lunch or something. And it turns out he had been in a village in northern Syria for several weeks doing a survey. Now, in those days, the behavioralist was the method of a lot of sociology and political science. So he had a questionnaire, and he went around to people in the village asking these questions, top to bottom, bottom to top, but he would interview several dozen people, I guess, and at different kind of economic, social levels in the village. And he was very keen on that because the same village had had a survey done 10 years earlier, back in the 50s. And he had read the survey done in the 50s, of the same kind of questionnaire in the 50s. And one of the key questions was to a farmer, a fellahin, what would you like your son to be when he grows up? Everyone in the village in the 50s said, no question, a farmer like me. That's the only thing one can be. I'm a farmer, my son will be a farmer. He was very excited. Because this time, this is now 1965, he asked the question. A large percentage, like 1/3 of the people said, Rais Jumhuriya, which means President of the Republic. All of a sudden, the people had become politicized. They had become aware of politics. They had become aware of social mobility. Now, part of this was, I'm sure, because it was near an Alawite area, and the Alawites, had sort of become the government in Damascus. But from a sociological point of view, there had been this huge sea change in people's attitudes and understanding of politics. So I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Well, I thought it was interesting because I'd been to SAIS. And I went down to Damascus, where the embassy is, a couple of weeks later. I said, wow, I had this interesting conversation with this guy about this village in northern Syria, and they sort of said, huh? They weren't too interested. Yeah. Well, okay, they had their own concerns, and they were worrying about cabinet changes and things like that. But I just thought that SAIS had given me so much insight into what was going on that I would not have had otherwise, and that gave me, I'm not sure it helped my career much, but it certainly gave me a lot of pleasure, and I think it helped my career too.
That's terrific. And what are you doing currently?
Okay.
Yeah.
Fast forward, I was in the Foreign Service 33 years.
Yes, thank you for doing that.
I was, ended up ambassador to a small country in Africa called Gabon, and also Sao Tome and Principe. I then came back, I was what's called PDAS, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Africa. And that was in the late 80s, early 90s. And then the Berlin Wall came down, and I ran a program in Eastern Europe helping governments move to a market economy and privatization, telephone companies, that kind of thing, in the early 90s. And I retired in 96. And I continued work as a consultant in Eastern Europe because I had been traveling and I knew some of the ministers and I'd taken part in a privatization, that kind of thing. And so I did that for 3 or 4 years. I had clients, companies in Poland and Romania and the Czech Republic and Slovenia. And that was really, I liked that a lot. And then there was sort of a boom and then a bust in the telecommunications IT industry back around 1990. And I said, well, I really enjoy business, but I also have another bent. And this other bent was I really liked teaching at our church. I'd always been kind of churchy. I had been brought up by a devout Episcopalian mother, and I'd been through all the stuff that you go through. And as an adult, I had become interested in, and having lived in the Middle East, learning more about Bible study. I'm basically a Bible study guy. So I had been teaching at our church the lectionary on Sunday morning of the scriptures that were being read, and then weekday nights I gave courses sometimes on Psalms and other things. Same thing happened with the Navy and SAIS. I realized I love doing this, but I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'd been reading a lot of books, but I didn't have a systematic academic understanding of what was going on. So my clients disappeared in Eastern Europe, and I decided to go to a seminary. And I went to Virginia Theological Seminary over here in Alexandria for 2 years, and they have a 2-year academic degree. If you're getting ordained, it's a 3-year degree. But I didn't plan to get ordained, so I just wanted to do the Bible study stuff and church history and all these other good things that people take when they're training to be a minister in the Episcopal tradition. So I did all that, and I completed that 2-year program. That helped me a lot with teaching at my church, but I also looked around for something else to do full-time, a day job, and I started working at the cathedral on a project there in South Africa with an archbishop in South Africa, and I also was chairman of the Peace Commission for the Diocese of Washington, and that was really interesting. And then there's a program that seminarians usually do, which is called a clinical pastoral education, which is you're a chaplain in a hospital or a hospice or a nursing home, something like that. And I worked for several months in Sibley Hospital here in Washington as a chaplain. That was a life-changing experience because you're working with people who are sick and dying, and you know it's a very moving experience. So that was drawing on my theological training, but also my just life experience. And then a friend of mine said, oh, there's this little group on Capitol Hill that's looking for a new executive director, and I ended up here. And what I do now is I'm a head of a nonprofit, which is a coalition of 24 national church groups, Catholics, Orthodox, mainstream Protestants, peace churches like the Quakers, Church of the Brethren, Mennonites. And we're also reaching out to evangelical groups and historically African American groups. But we don't do religion per se. We do political advocacy. We do advocacy and education with the Congress, with the White House, with the State Department, very narrowly focused on the conflict between Israel and Palestinians. So we're trying to promote an agreement for peace or progress towards an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, and that's what I do full time. And we also have developed a grassroots network around the country thanks to the internet. We now have about 14,000 people who get our bulletin every week, and when something comes up here, we send them an action alert and ask them to write their congressman or senator or the president or something. And so I'm another. We don't call it lobbying because that has to do more with legislation, and it's not tax deductible. But we call it advocacy, and that is education advocacy is tax deductible. And we're a 501c3, which means if you give us money, you can deduct that from your taxable income. So that's what I do. And I have an appointment, for example, tomorrow in the State Department to go down and talk about unequal rights in the West Bank.
That is super interesting. Yeah, and a great way to sort of weave your life experience
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
sort of theory from education,
Yeah.
and that's really neat.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
great. Well, now in looking back on your career and all the sort of evolutions of it, and current students today at SAIS, what advice might you have for them?
Keep your eyes and ears open. Be open to new ideas, to people. I think probably SAIS is a wonderful combination of working with really interesting people, both your fellow students and the professors, the teachers, and then strengthening your own intellectual discipline in one particular area of specialization. And I think both are really important for a career. I mean, both developing the personal relationships and the personal interaction, which is an education itself, and a rigorous academic intellectual training for what you want to do. So, you know, when I was there, it was mostly MA candidates. There were not so many. There were a few, not many PhD candidates. And I think you know, SAIS has now expanded a great deal. It's got a lot more going on, overseas branches and so forth. But I think they're all trying to do the same thing, which is to train you for public service in various ways. And I think it's a great calling.
Well, terrific. Thanks so much for your time and for all you've done in the world.
Thank you very much.
We will look forward to being in touch again soon.
Okay.